Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Sticky Notes Chat with me, Chris Nodder, and Amanda Stockwell. Corey, again this week, is not with us.
He's out and about in the wild.
In the wild. Yeah, we never actually got to talking about it last week, so maybe we should just give a little bit of Corey time up front right now. Corey is out doing in-person user research studies right now, which is a very divisive topic, and I think we'll have Corey talking about that in an upcoming session, because I think it's going to be fun to talk about that kind of thing. He definitely has more faith in his ability to do that than either of us do right now for different reasons. So I think that could be an interesting conversation. I think it could also be one that could get a lot of audience participation. So that's for another week. Right now, this week, we are talking about certification. So certification is something that has come up recently in, I think, both Amanda's and my feeds, as people asking, well, what should I be doing? I want to get into UX, or I want to improve my chances in UX. I'm already in UX. What can I do to show to people that I have some skills? And one of the things that's available is certification, is different classes or different just exams that you can take to show that you have a certain level of understanding of things in the UX field. So both Amanda and I have separately run little one-question surveys, which of course have all the validity of a one-question survey to a random audience of, no, a semi-random audience of people who follow us on either Twitter or LinkedIn. But it's still really interesting, because I think there's an element of those one-question surveys which is hard to ignore, about what people who are actually doing the hiring think about certification. So, Amanda, do you want to tell me what you found out from those surveys? And what we'll do is we'll talk about the numbers we found. Then I think we ought to talk more about what we think about certification. And I would welcome anybody who's watching, ask questions, leave comments, and we will get you some, we'll try and get your questions into this as well, because we want to know what people who on both sides are thinking. Either if you're somebody who recruits, let us know what you think about certification, or if you're somebody who wants to be recruited or is looking for a job, let us know what questions you have or what you think certification has done for you, especially if you just got a job and you think certification was part of that. But so, Amanda, sorry, take it away. What did you have?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want my usual caveats, right? So one, I do not have any official certifications of any kind. Is that true? Actually, I went to Scrum Master training like 10 years ago at a job. Right. But I don't have any UX specific certifications, I guess, unless technically my college degree is sort of related. But to Chris's point, we were curious, because Chris and I both have our own thoughts and feels, but we were curious kind of to see what people were thinking. So I put it out both to my LinkedIn group and on Twitter, just to kind of get a sense for, do you prefer a certification or not, or do you care? So the options were, if you're hiring, what do you think about certifications? 7% of the people said that they require a certification. 25% said that they prefer one, but it's not necessary. 3% actually said that they prefer somebody does not have a certification.
Yes.
And 65% didn't care either way. And then of those that either preferred or required certifications, 26% decided or preferred that they come from a college or university. A little under 6.5% preferred that they come from a boot camp, but 24.5% said they preferred what I call sort of like business organizations, sort of like NNG is one that comes to mind a lot. And then 43% said that they don't care. Which the overwhelming response is a meh. A lot of not caring. And I also will say, anytime you gather data, you have to be, kind of sure about where the results come from. So obviously the people probably on my, who follow me on Twitter and follow me on LinkedIn, tend to be people who are already in UX, people who already have an interest in research, and kind of a mix of whether they're hiring or not, but I phrased the question to be, if you're hiring, what are you looking at? So I think that the results skew more towards more senior UX people, or just like, they're not always UX people, but product or other technology people, because I asked about their teams. So yeah, and overwhelming meh when it comes to certifications. How about you? Yeah, meh. How about you, Chris? Did you find anything different from me?
Yeah, I did, and I think I know why. Let me put something up on the screen. Doink. There we go. Oh, so what I actually wrote a post on this. Let me actually post that as well. Let me post a link to the post I wrote. Whoa, post a link to the post. Here we go. Boink, boink. So that's in the chat feed now as well. So I completely agree with your caveat about who answers the questions. But mine is from a slightly different perspective, because I think that I had several people who are in the process of getting certification answer who didn't read the question properly. And even in the thing I said around this, I said, hey, if you're doing certification, or if you're interested in the results, I will publish them. Don't answer this just to see what other people say. But when I looked at who had been responding, a lot of people had either had student or out of work statuses. And I didn't want to exclude them, because it's quite possible that in a previous job they were in the position to shortlist UX candidates. But I actually got kind of an inversion of yours. I still had the 3% actively avoid, which is very interesting. So that's two different groups who 3% are like, no, keep me away from those things. And I got 7. You had 7%, very important kind of equivalent. I had 9%. I had the nice to haves were 54%, and the no differences were 34%, which is it's definitely inverted from what you had. But a lot of those nice to haves were people who were students who I imagine are currently in the process of getting certification. So I think I have a little bit of a skew. Now, that could just be me making post-hoc justifications for my data, and I'm quite happy to admit that. Hey, this is a one-question survey. And
at least we know what those things are.
Right, what post-hoc justifications. So yeah, actually, just for the rest of the world, post-hoc justifications is where you as a researcher come back at your data and start trying to say, well, it's like this because... And that basically is the sign that you did a bad study in the first place, because there's an opportunity to interpret the results a different way based on how you feel that day. And that's just a bad study. But I knew it was. It was a one-question survey. What the hell? I've got a lot of questions I would love to ask in a follow-up, a proper one where I recruited people for it rather than just throwing the question out to the general population, and where I knew that the people who were responding were actual recruiters, and I'd actually love to look at the difference between recruiters versus people who are doing interviewing as part of a loop of people who will then be working with you, your manager, your peers, to see whether there is a difference between those things. Because I think that there is a difference between the people who know UX, which is what you were getting to, wasn't it? And the people who don't know UX. So you go into that a little bit more, because I think that's an interesting one.
Yeah, and let me just go ahead and put my own bias on the table since we're discussing this. So I'm of the mind that it can't hurt to have a certification, but I'm not a person.
Well, apparently 3% of people think it does. But.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm of the mind that it can't hurt, but that I would never pick a certification as a requirement or a thing that was the main thing I was looking for. And if I was looking at several candidates for trying to hire somebody, I guess unless they were exactly equal otherwise, which never happens, I wouldn't give preference to people with certifications. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But the majority of which is, it kind of comes down to two things. For better or worse, there is no standard for a certification in UX. I know that Google is about to put one out, and that will, whatever. Whatever. And there's different universities that have, either like sometimes they're master's programs, sometimes they're just like 1-year certificates, sometimes that they are I don't know, like sometimes they're 2-year certificates, and that's really different than a 6-week certificate, and the level of detail that you can get into in those things. And I just find that a certificate isn't a very good signal about what somebody actually knows and what they're actually going to be able to do on a project with me or on a team with me. And so I just kind of have a general distrust of that being the signal that people are putting out, that look, hire me, I'm certified, whereas I'd much rather look at someone's experience and the projects they've worked on. And I recognize there's a whole thing about, well, what if I don't have any experience? And we can talk about that too, but I just don't think it's a very reliable signal for actual likelihood to be successful on a team with me. So I just want to put that that out there, as I'm coming at it with that frame of mind. So to echo Chris, I recognize that might color the results a little bit, but I think that the reason that, and I've had some other conversations with some more, sort of senior UX people too, and I think the reason, oh yeah, there you go, right on the nose, experience is more important than titles. And I think that other senior people that I know that I've had conversations about this with agree that they'd really much prefer to see that you have experience, and that maybe if you're getting into UX and you want to learn about it, it's not that a certificate is bad, it's not that training is bad. I very highly recommend that anybody go learn more, or even if you are an experienced UXer, like, it's cool to go learn more stuff. I just don't think the certificate itself is necessarily a good signal. So when I'm hiring, I might be like, oh, that's cool, what'd you learn there? But that won't give me very much information that I need to make a decision about joining.
But then there's something about you which is different from a lot of recruiters, which is UX. And
right.
You can ask the right questions.
There's that.
Whereas a lot of recruiters who have to recruit for UX positions are also recruiting for test, maybe even dev, maybe all sorts of other positions too. How can they tell? And I think that certification is probably the kind of thing that's a big relief for them. Oh, look, there's this kind of metric which I can go to. Well, they think it's a metric of UX-ness.
Yeah.
And that's a big sigh there, Amanda.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it's so I think definitely it's not like you say, it's not going to hurt in most cases, and it might help you if at least to get through that initial set of individuals that you have to get through to get into the interview loop, because those are the people who don't know the job role enough. And if they can say, oh, well, this person's got something, a certification that says they know what they're talking about, actually, does it? That's the next question, I guess.
Yeah. Well, before we move any further, I would love to hear just your 2-minute summation of how you feel about UX certification.
Only 2 minutes.
Okay, well, however long you need.
Let me rant. No,
20 minutes.
Okay. The short version is very similar to yours. I think that certification, by its nature, is a way of showing that you have a certain knowledge, not that you've ever applied that knowledge. So I can have a lot of knowledge on I can go and find knowledge on a lot of topics, but I know that doesn't make me an expert in those topics. I'm the kind of person who's quite happy to turn my hand to a lot of different things. But as soon as I start doing those things, I realize, oh yeah, even though you can read a lot of stuff online and you can watch all the YouTube videos in the world, when it actually comes to doing it, it's a bit harder. And you really are a novice still at that point until you've got the experience, until you've been doing this for a while. I think it's something, it goes back again to this idea of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is people who are underskilled might emphasize their skills or overestimate their skills. People who have a lot of skill tend to underestimate how skilled they are. And I'm not saying that necessarily even candidates who come in with certification are overestimating what they can do, but I think that there's an opportunity for recruiters to overestimate what they can do, or at least the certification doesn't tell you what somebody can do. It tells you that somebody did an exam. And by the way, I also did kind of a analysis of a lot of the different certification courses out there that I could find just by doing a search for UX certification. And by then following up with some people who had been through some of these programs.
Yeah.
And you can, for instance, do the Hfi certification for $700. You can just take the exam.
Oh.
I wouldn't recommend that somebody does necessarily, even somebody who knows UX, because I think Hfi uses specific terms for some of the things they talk about. And if you don't know those terms, you might not answer those questions correctly. But it's just a multiple choice question thing. British Computer Society, same thing. You can pay, I can't remember how much it was now, like £200 or something like that, to just go and sit their test.
Well, that brings up something that I would like to discuss a little bit when we're talking about all of this, because one thing that, depending on the context, that I think can be misleading about whether or not you have a certification is whether or not you can either afford one or have worked at an organization that was willing to pay for one.
Right.
And I know that boot camps get a lot of heat because they can be really expensive and people don't know exactly what you get out of them. But I think the same is true for a lot of the other certifications. They can be really expensive. And if you're paying for them on your own, or not, in sort of an organization or in a traditional learning environment, or even if you are, like universities can be really expensive. That is a whole big other topic of conversation. But my point being that I think one of the reasons that I pretty early on was like, I don't really care if you have a certification or not, is because at least the first 6 or 7 years of my career, everybody that I knew who had a UX certification had gotten one because their employer had paid for one.
Ooh, right.
And I didn't want to exclude anybody from hiring who hadn't been fortunate enough to work at a place that had the budget to pay for that sort of thing.
And they are expensive. I mean, I should probably just share. I mean, so this is the article I wrote on the kind of costs that you can expect. Well, it's all the pros and cons.
Yeah.
But okay, here we go. So it's pretty small on the screen. I wish I knew how to make this kind of thing bigger. I'm sure there's a way of doing it, but nah. Hey, I'm a UX person, not a we're talking about Bentley's UX certificate, which, by the way, I actually think is pretty good in terms of what it offers. Is $13,000. NNG to get that Nielsen Norman Group to get their regular UX certificate is $3,500. If you want the master certificate, you're talking about $9,500, and a lot of time as well. In between, you've got some other ones, Human Factors International. You're talking about almost $6,000 to get the certification. And with some of those, I don't know what you get for it. I really don't know what you're actually learning as a result of those things. So yeah, I think that you're right. It can be quite exclusionary. If you say I will only take people with certificates, then you've excluded a bunch of people who may have had an ideal opportunity to make your team much more diverse, without really thinking about their other skills and the fact that they may actually have had 10 years experience doing this work.
Yep.
Or they might have no certification in UX, but they might have a master's degree in I don't know, psychology or something, which is such an interrelated discipline that it's likely they could teach your team a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the other things that, like, personally, when I was hiring to build out a UX team, and that I always recommend other people as I'm coaching them to build out other teams, which is something I accidented my way into doing quite frequently these days, is that a UX team is kind of like a puzzle of related skills and sort of related disciplines. And I don't want everybody necessarily on my team to have the exact same experience. Some of the best UXers I've worked with over the years have come from all kinds of different backgrounds, and their perspective and their sort of unique take was really, really useful on our team. It was really valuable to have that kind of mishmash. And so that's not to say, by the way, that I don't appreciate, for instance, like, I agree that I think the Bentley program is really great. I know a lot of really smart people who went there.
Right.
I know that like typically I like the I very frequently reference things on the NAG website. I send people there all the time. I think it's great. It's not to say that these things aren't good. It's just to say that to me, they're not necessarily the thing that I'm looking for when I am looking to kind of build out a team or build out understanding. And so I also think one of the things that kind of came up, I think it was a question that we had was, okay, but if somebody's transitioning into UX from something related, maybe a UX certification is enough to give them, a foot in the door to their new, to the new role, or to give them some context.
Right.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but I have some too.
Well, go ahead. I mean, well, okay. First off, one thing. There's somebody whose comment I want to put up. This is Catalina. I used to work with her. She's really smart. she's a designer. Worked on several of the Microsoft products with me. She said people who take the effort to get a UX training at least have the right motivation, so some form of user empathy. So I think they deserve a plus over those who don't. However, I'd always check that if they believe this gives them enough training. And I think what she's saying there is because it doesn't. So they've got the motivation to go off and do it. So yeah, I mean, that's one way of doing the motivation. Again, if you can't afford it, you can test motivation with people like, well, what else have you done? What else have you, what did you do to find a way to do things even though you didn't have the money to do the certification? But it's a good point. It can show that somebody's got the push, the drive to get into UX. And I mean, I know some of the people who I talked to about why they were doing certifications said, I wanted to prove that I was serious about this. Yeah. So there's some stuff there about that. Here's another one. This is switching careers after 9 years. So coming from a different design career, certification can be helpful to understand UX processes, and it's easy to transition into a UX job. Yes, if you get the right certificate.
Yeah.
And I think this is also where you start talking about boot camps versus just straight up training. I think a boot camp sort of situation gives you insight into the steps that you go through from very first inception of a project through to delivery, typically, if it's done right. Caveat, caveat, caveat. Whereas some of the certifications out there you can do, for instance, and I'm not dissing the Nielsen Norman Group one. Hey, I used to work there, but the courses there, you could probably go through a whole bunch of courses without actually really understanding the UX process. You could get your certification, but you wouldn't be any clearer about what the process of doing UX from beginning to end actually is. So yes, it's true, but not always. It does depend on what certificate you do.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, yeah, and I totally agree. I don't mean to say that probably in all of these different classes or trainings or certificates or whatever, I think there's probably something that anybody could glean from each of them. Like there's always something new you can learn from, even just talking to other people who are experienced, that you can be like, oh, that's how you handle that. Like I should try that. I think there's always something probably that you can learn. And I do think that it does something to signal interest, especially if you're kind of moving over. I think that probably for me, and I think for reading from what you're saying, that the big caveat is just that it's not enough. A UX certification is nice and you can learn things from it, but it's not enough to mean that you're ready to be successful in a UX role. And I think that's where I get kind of stuck about it. I don't dislike them or think they're not useful. I just think that sometimes people take one of those classes after being, a house painter for 10 years and are like, cool, I'm ready for my tech job. And I'm like, well, maybe. And it's not that being a house painter is bad or wouldn't have great, insight into things. It's just different. And a short course and a certificate doesn't mean that you're ready necessarily.
Yeah. And I think just in the interest of full disclosure, both Amanda and I make online courses, which vary in length from 30 minutes to probably 2 hours, I think is probably the longest of any of mine have ever been. you get a little certificate at the end of those too, which I think some people really love collecting those certificates. And I think there are some organizations which kind of encourage that. I'm really not suggesting that any of those certificates on their own would be an indication that you've got a specific skill set. I mean, I'm not trying to do myself out of a job here.
Yeah, I know.
It's hard, right? I don't think that you could say, hey, I've taken all of Chris's courses. Now I know what Chris knows. I mean, welcome to my brain. Ooh.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. But I think there's awesome value in what we do. I think we've helped a lot of people over the years, but I don't know that you could say that that's enough for on its own for starting a career in UX. Oh, okay. If you're starting a career in UX and you've got a very supportive team around you, those things are definitely going to help you over having nothing. But I don't think in and of themselves they're sufficient. Either you need that supportive team around you, or you need some other kind of experience, which actually does then lead to this question of, well, what else should I do instead?
Well, so I actually do have some thoughts, and I absolutely also recognize that there's sort of a chicken and egg problem, right? We've talked about this before. You can't get experience without having work to do, and if you don't have any work to do, how can you get experience? I 1000% understand that, but there are lots of opportunities with real life constraints to learn about UX and then to put those things into practice. So, I remember very clearly one of the people I hired along the day had been a graphic designer who had wanted to get more into UX, who had taken some classes online, and then volunteered for a friend of theirs owned a restaurant, and they redesigned their restaurant website. Right. It wasn't a job per se, but it was a gig, and there were the real life constraints of here's how many items we have on the menu, and people are actually visiting this website and like calling us to make reservations and that kind of thing.
And this is the kind of thing that, as an interviewer, I can go, aha. Now, tell me about how it was working with a client and the client needs, and tell me about how it was with those real world constraints, and tell me about. And I've got all these questions I can ask somebody to find out whether they really learned anything from that gig. Yeah. Whereas when you say, oh, I took some classes, you can say, so tell me about, I don't know, like, well, what did you learn? And it's different. You can tell me about the academic learning, but I can give you that on the job using things like the LinkedIn courses or something like that. I can't necessarily I can't work out whether you're the kind of person who can interact well with clients, who can interact well with participants, who can do all those kind of things, unless you can give me examples of times where you've done that in the past. So yeah. Agreeing with you on that one for sure.
Yeah. And I just also want to kind of point out, like, if you're someone who's looking for certifications or looking for boot camps or looking for some kind of certification or degree or something, I recognize that especially right now is a really hard time to get a position at all, let alone whether it's junior or senior level. Now it's just not a great time to be looking for a job. But what?
There's still jobs out there. There's still jobs out there. In fact,
that's true. There are still jobs out there. But I guess my point was to say, try to do your research about, like, who else has graduated from those things? What have they gone on to do? What, like, practical hands-on experience do they have? So I have hired a handful of people who came out of boot camps who, they were fairly long boot camps, and they spent the last 2 months working on a project. And so they had real life experience where they had, found a client of some kind that was real and had really built something from scratch and done user research and all that kind of thing. So I would say try to look for understanding what you're actually going to get out of it, and looking for more practical experience than a piece of paper that checks off to say, ta-da, you did it. You filled out the multiple choice quiz.
So I think that's something which is that was probably been my biggest takeaway for people is do your research up front, and do your research not just for what the cost versus the time is for all of these things, but also what is it that recruiters are going to be looking for from this?
Mm.
Not just recruiters who are the people who do the initial sifting, but when you get into interview with the people who you will be working with on a daily basis, what do they look for? And what they're looking for is things that can tell them that you will fit in on the team. They're not looking for an entry-level position. Somebody's not looking for 10 years of experience. It's an entry-level position. What they're looking for is clues that you can be a good team member. Mm-hmm. And that will come from even from something like doing a course project as part of even with other students. It's like, well, what did you learn from that? I can ask you questions about that. It's not my favorite one because it can be very unrelated to reality if you didn't have a proper client, but it at least gives me something to find out. Well, could you work on a team? Did you work with the other students? What were the problems you had? Was there some slacker who didn't contribute? Were you that slacker who didn't contribute?
Never. I was the type A one.
I was the slacker who kind of did the contributions at the end. But no. So, if I haven't got that thing to do the behavioral questions from, it's hard for me to actually just ascertain whether you're the right kind of person for this position. So that's one thing. Is does this certificate that you've got have that you're going to go for have some kind of practical aspect to it? Has it got something where you can then turn around and say, I did this thing? Does it, and these days this is becoming more important even for UX researchers, have a portfolio that you produce as you go along? I struggle with portfolios for UX researchers because the research we do is part of what contributes to a larger thing that a lot of other team members are involved in. Can I then put that portfolio together and say, hey, this is my work? No, I can't. But what I can do is say what I contributed to that. I can show some of the information that I fed into it. I can show some of the stuff that some of the sessions I led with the team to help them do some ideation work. I can show all sorts of things in a portfolio that aren't just wireframes or prototypes or little cute animations or whatever. So there's a lot of things that you can do to put together a portfolio, and often these certification courses, some of the better ones, will help you through that process, and they will, part of the process of doing the certification gives you the elements of the portfolio as you go. And as you go through the certification, you're building up different parts of the portfolio. As you cover those sections in the class, you end up creating content which then becomes your portfolio. So I would look for ones which are giving you A, practical experience, and B, hopefully some kind of opportunity to develop the portfolio that you need. That's especially true for the visual design, the UX design side of things. It's becoming increasingly more important for the UX research side of things as well, I'd say.
Yeah, I just was going to say maybe we should have a whole other discussion about UX research portfolios, because I have lots of that there too.
I'm so glad I didn't have to have one. I'm trying to put something together from, especially if you've worked under NDA for a lot of clients. I don't know how I would put one together now. It would be very difficult for me to do that from a lot of the client work that I've done. I don't have permission to show it to anybody. So yeah.
Yeah, we can loop back around to that, but I think that I think that to go back to the sort of the idea of certifications, I think one of the other things that we've been touching on but haven't explicitly stated also is that I think it depends on the point in your career. If I right now was to get a certification, I don't think it would make any difference in the type of clients I land or projects I work on, or based on recruiter reach out, what sort of jobs I'd be recruited for. Right. Now, I might be in a slightly different, category of experience than some people, since we're freelancing, not looking for full-time work. But my point is, my clients aren't UX people, so they don't know or care. All they care about is, all they care about is that my past clients are happy.
That's one of the most important things. I get most of my work through referrals, so it's one person telling another person, hey, you should use this guy, he's awesome. But the other thing I'd say is you kind of do have a portfolio. It's not a portfolio in the traditional sense, but somebody can go on to LinkedIn Learning and say, oh, look, she's got all these courses out there. Maybe that means she knows what she's talking about.
She absolutely, they wouldn't have put her up there if she's totally
Well,
clueless.
that is actually one thing about LinkedIn as opposed to some of the other platforms, is that they recruit you to be somebody who's an author, a instructor on the system, rather than you being able to just upload what you want.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely, that's your portfolio, I guess, now. And I used to teach some of the NNG courses. Does that mean I get an NNG certification for free? Maybe I
think
should ask.
so. I think
Maybe
it should.
I should ask, right? It's like, hey, Jacob, can I get a free certificate? But he'd be like, no, you can pay for it like everybody else. But no, I mean, what would it do for me? Would it help? No, it wouldn't help me in my current role. But if I were new to this field,
yeah, well, and let's kind of go back to what I was going to say, is that I think that if you're someone who has more than maybe 5 years of experience, maybe 3, I don't know exactly what the threshold is, but if you're someone who's already kind of not in that super beginner stage yet, you're kind of maybe more mid or senior level, you know, if I was working at somewhere that was going to offer to send me to a training for a week and get me a certificate, I'd probably say yes.
It's a week off of work. Why not?
Well, and I want to be truthful. Like, I think that probably I would learn something. You always can learn something if you're paying attention to other people's experience, but I wouldn't anticipate it having a huge impact on my career direction. I wouldn't expect to get a raise. I would not assume that I will, you know, be promoted, any of those things. It would just be kind of a nice thing to have. Were I trying to break in, or very, you know, kind of in a very junior position, like newer to UX, I think that it can be more helpful. This is kind of a weird inverse thing, but I think it's more helpful to have a certificate the less experience you have. Because to some of the points made earlier, yeah, it can kind of signal interest, and you're taking it seriously, and you're investing in, you know, sort of the industry, rather than just kind of testing it out, you know, trying it on for size. So I don't know what to say about that. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I just think that it's true, that the later on in your career that you are, and the more experience you have, that the less impact it might have. Whereas it might get you in a door, for those, I don't know, 30% of people or whatever who prefer or require it. It might get you in the door, in a way that if you're otherwise don't have much to rely back on, if you don't have a lot of other project work, if you don't have a lot of experience, it might be a way to get you started.
And then you have to ask yourself, is it worth $5,000, $8,000, $10,000, $13,000, and a serious investment in time to have that foot in the door? Or are there other ways that you can do that without necessarily having to spend that money to get that level of experience or certification or qualification or whatever it is you want to call it? I got to put this up on the screen. Is there a class or certificate in learning to Slack? I should make a course on how to Slack
you could add that to your repertoire.
Yeah. I'd love to have that as like, I don't know. So sometimes people put their certification letters after their name. Like, I mean, I'm kind of okay with people doing that if they've got a doctorate or something, but I don't think I'd personally ever do it, even with a doctorate. But putting it after you've just been through a 5-day training course, and then putting the letters of that certification after your name is kind of not really much. It's more of a way, I think, of advertising for the company that does the certification than anything else. But yeah, maybe we should have it like certificates in all the other stuff you need to know when you do UX, like how to slack off. Actually, more seriously, Catalina, who I already threw something up on the screen that she talked about before. I see if I can see this again. She said true. This is a massive one, but I'll just read the first part. True and deep user empathy is something I don't see often. We typically need to learn it from someone else. So is that something you can learn from a certification? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, you can start, but it's just something that comes over time, and that's something where, if you've had a role, I've recruited people in the past, and I've worked with people who came from completely different job roles into user experience. One of them came from, this is when I was working in the fintech industry, and one of them came from being a bank teller. And talk about user empathy, man.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
somebody who really did not need much in the way of help with user empathy. In fact, was giving us lessons in that on a regular basis. So different roles can give you that. Do you get it from certification? Not so much. So there's other things outside of the typical skill set, which a certificate checks the boxes for, which you need for these roles, and you're only going to get that from experience, from practice, from doing stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and I just want to, before I forget to say this, I want to also make a distinction that I think that you should, one of those things that you need to be successful in UX is a constant curiosity and drive to learn. It's just that I don't necessarily equate receiving a certificate with learning. So I feel like you could take, you could do a bunch of reading, you could take classes, you could go to meetups and like listen to talks, you could log on a lot right now. A lot of conferences are going online and having, very low cost or free access to their videos of the talks. There are tons of ways that you can learn without getting a certificate. And I know, I think there was a question about, whether it's worth it to invest or not. Well, I guess it wouldn't be a Sticky Notes chat if I didn't go, it depends. It depends.
We need a banner for that, don't we? A big flashing one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a marquee with lights around it.
It depends what your past experience is. It depends what your goals are. It depends what your financial situation is. It depends on what the program is and what you're looking to get out of it. It depends, honestly, on kind of all kinds of factors that you need to really figure out for yourself. And I know that, again, some of the certificates or boot camps or those kinds of things are really great. Some of them are run by really successful people who have really successful people coming out of it, and they teach you all kinds of practical things. Some of them are multiple choice quizzes that if you can memorize, you can pass. And so it depends. I'm sorry to leave it at that, but it depends whether it's worth it or not.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because talking about do qualifications make a difference, I got to throw this on the screen. Alyssa says having a master's degree in experimental psychology, which, I mean, okay, I got an undergraduate degree in social psychology, I guess, and then a master's in HCI, human computer interaction, but that didn't get my foot in the door in UX. I've got to ask, why? But because I didn't have, it's no direct experience. So going to a Tech Ladies event sold my skill set to a PM who advocated for me personally. So just even having the degree isn't necessarily enough. I mean, that's true. And I think what Alyssa did there, going out, selling, knowing she had the skills, being brave enough to sell those to somebody who could then, inside an organization, who could then advocate for you.
Yeah.
That's the other way of doing it, right? It's not about necessarily the certification. In an earlier episode, we talked about our backgrounds in UX. And I think one of the things we decided was it's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know. I know all of my jobs came from a referral of some description. There was somebody, I reached out to people, but the thing that happened was I said to those people, can you help me get a job with this organization? Or, hey, remember when we met? And I was so awesome. How about you give me a job? Or you tell your organizations they should hire me. So those situations don't come from paying money to attend a class. Those situations come from you reaching out to people, putting yourself in the right position where you can find the individuals who are going to be the people that are going to be interested in you. And it might not be that they're going to hire you tomorrow. That's not the whole. That's the whole thing about networking, is I think people just try and grow their networks because one of these people might lead to a job. No, it's not about that. It's about growing meaningful connections to people who at some point in the future may be in a position to help you out with finding a job in the future. And it might not be them that hire you, but it might be them who know somebody.
Yeah.
That's also something I found out from some of the bootcamp / certification courses is that the people who came off of them, who I talked to, said it wasn't even necessarily the skills I learned on the course. It was the people who were teaching me who were also in industry, who then knew somebody with a job, or I found somebody who had a job. Then I looked up that person and found out they had worked in the same organization as this person who had taught me. I reached out to the person who taught me. They put in a good word for me. So it's
I interned in college for one of my professors. I wholeheartedly suggest that method. But I think to that note, though, even if you don't already know a bunch of people in the UX industry, I think we are one of the most approachable in terms of show up at a Ladies at UX or UXPA event and say, I'm interested in learning. I don't know much about this. I want to learn. I know off the top of my head, probably at least a half dozen people who were doing other things, but were kind of interested in UX, started coming to like local meetup events at some of the local things that I've done. And I think like at least half a dozen I can count that like now have jobs in UX roles at UX companies because they made connections, they volunteered on things, they kept seeing people over time, they were asking questions, and to your point, they made meaningful connections, not just, hi, I'm Amanda, can you give me a job? Hi, I'm Amanda, can you give me a job? It doesn't work exactly like just showing up, but it's showing up and making a connection. And I think that kind of goes back to that. How much do you really care? Are you going to be a good fit for the team? Are you going to be a good teammate? All of those things that we have talked about kind of around being a successful UXer, because the core skill set, or at least knowledge of the whole skill set, is just kind of the baseline. Like you have to just know what everything is. You just do. And then we can layer things on top of that.
And even for an entry-level position, it's not like you have to know what everything is, because you're probably going to be spending some time just running some very basic, traditional kind of studies for a while. I mean, unless you're in some kind of crazy startup where you're the only person. If you're on a team and you're the entry-level person, you will be spending time running a certain kind of pretty traditional study for a while, most likely. So you don't have to know all the skills for all the different stuff that exists in UX. You just have to have a basic background in it. And turning up to events, I mean, so Alyssa was saying she had a master's in, what was it, experimental psychology. She could teach people. There's no harm in her going to one of these meetups and actually giving a talk about something that's relevant to the tech field, that would give everybody who attended some good information. And then all the people there who were in a position to hire would be like, that looks like a smart individual. Maybe we should pay some attention to her. What she said, she sent a little follow-up message, which was companies didn't know how her academic work would translate into a business setting. So it was like, she had to emphasize her adaptability and her diverse skill set. Well, one way of doing that would be to give a presentation, right? It's like, hey, I've got a diverse skill set. Let me show you how I can contribute knowledge to you because of my skills I've got. There's so many things that people can do, and it's not just a question of going along to these things. You have to kind of contribute to these things too, and that's what's going to get you noticed. We're getting to the point where we should wrap up.
Yeah. Go
ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so if you had to say like one last nugget, what are your thoughts on UX certificates? What would you say?
Here we go. Here's what I would say. This is something that Sam's somebody who follows us quite a lot, I think, because I see comments quite a lot from Sam. Hi, Sam. Being taught by somebody in the industry versus a recent certificate student makes a huge difference. I think that's true. I think that there's so many other ways to get the information that you get from a certification, and that's only one part of what you need. So only do certification if you know it's what if you've convinced yourself it's what you need, you can afford it in terms of cost, in terms of time, and there are not other ways of getting the same information, knowing that quite often those certificates won't give you everything that you need, because they may not give you the real world experience that interviewers are going to be asking you about. they're going to be asking you questions, behavioral interview questions about, tell me about a time when, and you need to be able to answer those questions. Yeah. Amanda, your closing thoughts.
My closing thoughts are, it depends, man. It depends. I think that certificates can be a good way to signal learning, but I would say that we haven't really touched on this. Getting a certificate doesn't mean you'll get a job, which I think sometimes is how they get looked at.
Well, some of the certificate farms actually say you'll have your money back if you haven't got a job in 6 months, but read the small print. That's not true. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I think that it can be useful, and I super encourage everybody to keep learning and keep working. But I would say that as someone who's been in a position to hire lots of times, that I would much rather see your practical experience and your ability to apply knowledge, and your ability to, even if you're coming from something different, like the bank teller example, that's super applicable.
Oh, yeah.
So find ways to make what you already know applicable, and focus on those things. But I would say that a certificate can be nice. I wouldn't turn it down if somebody said, here's 10 grand, go get this. But
wait, if somebody said, here's 10 grand, would you use it to go get a certificate?
Oh, no. Only if it was.
No, I'm not talking about spending it on booze or something, or candy or whatever. But would you, here's 10 grand to improve yourself, would you spend it on a certificate? I don't think I would. I think I'd find other ways of doing it. There's some conferences I'd attend instead. There's other ways of learning. There's so many things I'd want to do. Doing a deep dive with some people in a slightly different career path they've taken. There's so many things. I mean, that's me with the luxury of doing what I do right now.
Yeah. And had you asked me 10 years ago, I may have given you a different answer, because I was pretty new, and whoever, who knows what I would have said. But what I'll say again is just, I encourage people to keep learning, but I encourage people also to be cautious about where they decide to spend their time and money, and to recognize that there's a lot of other things other than a certificate that would probably be more helpful.
Bingo. I think that's pretty much, I think that sums up for both of us what we think about certification. It's like,
So we match the rest of my followers. Nah.
So anyway, we have to stop. Come on, these people, everybody who's been watching is probably like, okay, enough of these two. Thank you so much for watching. We are Chris Nutter and Amanda Stockwell. Stickynotes.chat is the website where you can find more details from this episode. I'll post the links there to the resources that I mentioned. I'm not sure if Amanda's going to write anything up about the little survey she ran. If she does, we'll put some stuff up there about that too.
I will eventually, but not this
eventually.
Week.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the great thing about the website is we can retrospectively throw stuff up there. Follow us on LinkedIn. Follow us as individuals. If you follow the Sticky Notes chat hashtag, that also will let you know a lot about what we're doing too. Next week, Corey is back with us, and we are discussing what it means to be a consultant, because there seem to be some misconceptions out there about how we just basically swan around giving people unworkable advice and then running away before they actually have to implement it. And how basically that means that we can't actually do stuff. We obviously don't fit in on teams, because if we did, we'd be doing that kind of work rather than being consultants. There's all sorts of interesting stuff out there, which we've been talking about between the three of us and getting annoyed about. So we're going to get annoyed live on air.
Yeah.
You ready for that one, Amanda?
Annoyed together. Oh, I guess so.
So yeah, that's going to be us next Thursday. And in the meantime, please do get in touch with us if you've got questions about this topic. I will do my best to go into the comments from this session, both immediately after this event and subsequently during the week, to find out if there's any more questions that people have. But until next week, take care. We'll talk to you sometime soon. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.